My wife stood in a courtroom and told a judge I never built anything. What she didn't tell him, what she couldn't tell him, was that everything she'd ever built I paid for. Every brick, every blueprint, every breakthrough with her name on it, mine, and I let her have it. Right up until the moment she tried to take everything else too. Welcome back to Dad's true revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The day Sandra filed for divorce, I was eating a ham sandwich. Not a metaphor. Actual ham. Yellow mustard, the cheap kind on white bread, because we were out of wheat. I remember because the process. Server knocked so hard the mustard packet slipped and got on my shirt. The blue one Sandra bought me for our 15th anniversary. And my first thought wasn't, my marriage is over. It was, that stain is never coming out. That tells you something about where we already were. Her attorney was a man named Brett Evans. Sharp suit, sharper. Haircut, the kind of guy who built $400 an hour and made you feel like you should thank him for it. Sandra had hired him 6 weeks before she served me, which meant she'd been planning this while we were still having Sunday dinners, while she was still asking me to pass the salt, while she kissed me on the cheek every morning like we were extras in a movie about a happy marriage. 19 years. Ham sandwich blue shirt. Now, before I go any further, and I need you to stay with me here, because what happens in that courtroom is going to rearrange something in your brain. Let me tell you exactly who Sandra Peterson thought she was divorcing. She thought she was divorcing a man with nothing, and technically she had receipts. George Peterson, no property in his name, no patents, no business registrations, no published work, no titles, no credentials, no corner office. On paper, I was the human equivalent of a blank page. Sandra, on the other hand, had everything. A thriving architectural consulting firm, Sandra Peterson Design Group, with 41 employees, a downtown office with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a client list that read like a Who's of American infrastructure. 3 published papers, 2 industry awards, a profile in Architectural Digest that used the phrase self-made visionary 3 times. Self-made. I'd cut that article out and put it on the refrigerator. Actually, Sandra had looked at it and smiled the way you smile at something that is both true and not true at all. And I'd smiled back, and neither of us said the thing we both knew. We were very good at that. Here's what Sandra's Architectural Digest profile didn't mention. The firm started in our garage in a house I bought with money I'd saved for 11 years working as a project finance consultant, the least glamorous job title in the English language, by the way. What it means practically is that I spent my career figuring out how to fund large-scale construction and infrastructure projects, finding money, moving money, structuring deals so that ambitious, talented people could build things that actually got built. Sandra was the most ambitious, talented person I'd ever met, so I funded her not as an investor, not as a business partner, with a contract and a lawyer and a handshake deal, as a husband, because that's what you do when you believe in someone. You put your money where their dream is, and you don't ask for a receipt. The first check I wrote for Sandra Peterson Design Group was $47,000. She'd spread her business plan across 3 placemats. It was color-coded. Sandra color-coded everything. Red for risks, green for revenue projections, yellow for what she called faith-based assumptions, which was her charming way of admitting she was guessing. This is real, George, she said. I can actually do this. I looked at the plan. I looked at her. I signed the check. I know you can. I said. She cried. Actually cried. Sandra didn't cry easily. She was built from something tougher than the rest of us. So when tears came, they meant something. I should have gotten that in Writing. I'm kidding. Mostly over the next 14 years, I funded everything. The first office lease, $8,400 a month. Downtown, because Sandra said location. Was credibility, and she wasn't wrong. The drafting software licenses, the equipment, the first 3 employees, whose salaries I personally guaranteed. When the firm's cash flow was still more. Faith and fact. The legal fees when a contractor tried to stiff her on a project in '09, and she fought him all the way to arbitration and won. I paid for the win. I paid for all of it. And here's the part that sounds insane, but made complete sense inside a marriage. I didn't mind. That was the deal we'd made. Without ever making it official. Sandra was the builder. I was the foundation. She got her name on the blueprints. Because she'd earned it. Her talent was real. Her vision was real. Her work ethic was something I genuinely admired. For most of our marriage, the money was just the thing that made it possible. And I never once thought she'd use that arrangement to bury me. The divorce proceedings began on a Tuesday in October. Judge Raymond Whitfield, presiding, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, with a salt and pepper beard and the measured calm of someone who'd seen every variety of human catastrophe and had long since stopped being shocked by any of it. David Chester, my attorney, sat to my left. David was the kind of man who looked permanently underdressed, regardless of what he wore. Today it was a perfectly fitted charcoal suit, and he still somehow looked like he'd rather be fishing. Don't let that fool you. David Chester had never lost a case. That mattered. He told me one thing. Before we walked in, let them go first. Let them build the ceiling. Then we'll show the judge there's no floor. I didn't fully understand it. Then Brett Evans rose like a man who'd already won. Your Honor, he began. This is at its core a simple case. He smiled. Lawyers who say this is a simple case are never talking about a simple case. Sandra Peterson built a business. She built a career. She built from nothing one of the most respected architectural consulting firms in this region. He let that breathe. George Peterson contributed nothing to that enterprise. No labor, no expertise, no intellectual capital. He has in fact no verifiable professional output of his own to speak of. He opened a folder. What he does have is a pattern of transferring significant funds from joint accounts into the operating accounts of Sandra Peterson Design Group. Transfers which he will likely characterize as investment or support. He said both. Words like they were mildly embarrassing. Your Honor, these were not investments. There was no agreement, no equity arrangement, no promissory note. Under the law, money transferred between spouses into a joint marital enterprise constitutes a marital contribution one that Sandra Peterson has already been credited for in the asset valuation. He closed the folder. In plain English, he moved money around. She built something with it. The business is hers. The IP is hers. The reputation is hers. Mr. Peterson is entitled to his share of the liquid marital assets and nothing more. He sat down. I looked at Sandra. Sandra was looking at the table in front of her, not at me. She used to look at me like I was the answer to a question she'd been asking her whole life. Now, she was studying a mahogany tabletop, like it owed her something. Mr. Chester, Judge Whitfield said. Response, David stood slowly. He had a single yellow legal pad, one pen. He looked almost bored. Your Honor, the defense will demonstrate that Mr. Peterson did not simply move money. He structured, financed, and in several cases, personally guaranteed every major phase of growth at Sandra Peterson Design Group from its founding capital through its most recent expansion. We will further demonstrate that this was not a casual marital contribution, but a deliberate documented financial architecture that made the business not only possible but viable. He paused. We will also demonstrate that Mrs. Peterson was aware of this in writing on multiple occasions. Brett Evans' pen slowed down. We have documentation. David continued, almost gently, that Mrs. Peterson's own. Words in emails, in text messages, and in one particularly candid voicemail from March of 2019 described Mr. Peterson as, and I'll quote directly, "The reason any of this exists, silence." Brett leaned over to Sandra and whispered something. Sandra whispered back. I watched Brett's expression change just slightly, just around the eyes, in the way that expressions change when someone tells you something you were hoping wasn't true. I looked straight ahead. Here's what I want you to understand about those 19 years. I was not a saint. I was not a martyr. I didn't fund Sandra's dream out of some noble, selfless maid for television love. I did it because I believed in her, yes, but also because watching Sandra build things made me feel like I was part of something that mattered. I had the financial mind. She had the vision. Together, we were for a long time something genuinely remarkable. The marriage broke down slowly, the way things do, not in explosions, but in silences, in dinners where we talked about logistics instead of dreams, in anniversaries that felt like checkboxes, in the growing quiet realization that Sandra had stopped seeing me as her partner and started seeing me as her history, something she'd outgrown. I felt it before I could name it. I named it around year 16. I stayed anyway because I am either loyal or stupid, and the line between those two things is thinner than anyone admits. But here's what I did not anticipate. I did not anticipate that when Sandra decided to leave, she would leave the way she did, clean, surgical, with Brett Evans and 26 exhibits in a narrative so neatly constructed that George Peterson, the man whose money built every single floor of that downtown office, would be standing in a courtroom being described as a man who never built anything. She didn't just want the firm. She wanted me to walk out of that courtroom with nothing but the liquid marital assets, which after her attorney's creative accounting amounted to roughly $340,000 against a business valued at $14 million. She wanted me to take $340,000 and call it even and smile about it. Recess was called at 11:40 a.m. I stood in the hallway outside courtroom 4, loosening my tie, and my phone buzzed. My daughter Rachel, 23 years old, sharp as a blade, currently furious at her mother, in the particular way that only daughters who've watched quietly for years can be furious. How's it going? I typed back. They said I never built anything. 3 dots. Then Dad tell David to open the emails. I smiled for the first time all day. He knows I typed. Good, because Mom's about to find out what happens when you erase someone. I put the phone in my pocket. David appeared beside me with 2 cups of terrible courthouse coffee. They're rattled, he said quietly. Brett didn't know about the voicemail, I said. No, David said. He didn't. We stood there, drinking bad coffee in a courthouse hallway. How much did she tell him? I asked. David looked at me over his cup. Enough to win if we had nothing. Not enough for what we have. He said it simply like a weather report. After lunch, he said, I start presenting, and George, he paused. I need you to do exactly one thing when her face changes. What's that? Nothing, he said. Don't. Absolutely nothing. Don't smile. Don't nod. Don't you dare look satisfied. He took a sip. Let the documents do it. I nodded. We went back inside. And that afternoon, Your Honor, that's when it all unraveled, because David Chester opened a banker's box and Brett Evans saw what was inside it. And Sandra Peterson, for the first time since this whole thing began, looked at me, really looked at me, and I thought about the kitchen table, the color-coded business plan, the check for $47,000, the way she'd cried. And I thought, you knew the whole time, Sandra. You knew exactly what I built. This is where the box opens. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of. People watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. There's a moment in every courtroom and every marriage where the truth stops being a feeling and becomes a fact, where it stops living in your chest and starts living on paper. I'd waited 14 months for that moment. 14 months of Sandra's attorneys calling me financially reckless, emotionally absent and professionally invisible. 14 months of nodding and saying nothing. The banker's box had 14 years in it, and David Chester was about to crack it open. Like it was nothing. The box wasn't. Dramatic looking, that's the first thing I noticed when the court officer wheeled in on a small dolly after lunch recess. Standard banker's box, cream colored. The kind you buy in packs of 10 at any office supply store. It had a label on the side in David's small, precise handwriting. Peterson versus Peterson. Exhibit supplemental, a 1 box. Brett. Evans looked at it the way you look at something you're trying to decide is a problem. His jaw didn't drop. His eyes didn't go wide. He was too professional for that. But I've been watching people process financial information for 20 years, and I knew what recalculation looked like on a human face. Brett was recalculating. Sandra was not looking at the box. Sandra was looking at her hands. Mr. Tester, Judge Whitfield, said, settling back into his chair with the energy of a man who had cleared his afternoon. You may proceed. David stood, buttoned his jacket once, walked to the box like it was a piece of furniture he'd owned for years. Your Honor, I want to start with a number. He turned to face the room. 14. He let it sit there. 14 years ago, Sandra Peterson Design Group did not exist. There was no firm, no staff, no clients, no downtown office. There was a woman with extraordinary talent, a color-coded business plan, and a husband who believed in her enough to write a check that most banks wouldn't. He reached into the box. Out came a single document, slipped into a clear plastic sleeve. Plaintiff's Exhibit Supplemental 1A. Personal check dated September 14th, 2010, drawn from the personal account of George Raymond Peterson, made out to Sandra Peterson Design Group LLC. He walked it to the judge's bench for $47,000. Judge Whitfield looked at it. This, David continued, was the founding capital of the firm Sandra Peterson is, currently valuing at $14 million. He paused just long enough. George Peterson wrote it on a Tuesday evening at a kitchen table. No contract, no equity. Agreement, no legal instrument of any kind. Another pause because it was his wife and he trusted her. I heard Sandra exhale beside her table. Brett wrote something on his legal pad. David went back to the box. Here's the thing about 14 years of financial records. They tell a story that no one can argue with. You can dispute intentions. You can reframe motivations. You can stand in a cream blazer and describe your husband as a man who moved money around without purpose or vision. But you cannot argue with a check. You cannot argue with a wire transfer confirmation. You cannot argue with a signed lease guarantee, a payroll advance record, or an email from a wife to her husband that says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but only barely, without you, none of this would be standing. David had all of it, every single piece. Exhibit Supplemental 3. David said, placing another document before the judge, office lease for 1240. Commerce Boulevard, Suite 400, signed. October 2011. The personal guarantor on this lease, meaning the individual, legally responsible if payments were not met. He tapped the document is George Peterson, not Sandra Peterson Design Group LLC. George. He looked at Brett. A man, I'm told, who never built anything. Brett shifted in his seat. I didn't smile. I did not smile. Exhibit Supplemental 5 through 9. David continued, now moving with a rhythm that felt almost musical. 5 separate payroll advance records from 2012. through 2014 totaling $218,000. Transferred from George Peterson's personal accounts directly to Sandra. Peterson Design Group's operating account during periods when client payments were delayed and the firm could not make payroll. He set them down one by one. Jennifer Marks, currently Sandra's director of operations. She got paid because of these transfers. Todd Reeves, senior architect, same. Michelle Carter, office manager of 11 years. He placed the last one down softly. Same. He let that land. 41 employees, 14 years. The math was doing its own. Talking now, Brett Evans stood. Your honor, I'd like to object on the basis. That on what basis, Counselor Judge? Whitfield asked, not unkindly, Brett. Paused. The relevance of these transfers to the current valuation of they are directly relevant to the question of who built what, Mr. Evans, which is, as I understand, at the central claim your client made this morning. Judge. Whitfield looked at him steadily. Seat. Down. Brett sat down. I had always liked Judge Whitfield. David reached into the box again. This time he came out with a manila envelope sealed. He broke the seal in the courtroom, which I knew he'd staged because David Chester did not do anything accidentally. Exhibit. Supplemental 11, he said. Email chain between Sandra Peterson and George Peterson, dated March through July 2019, the period during which Sandra Peterson Design Group was negotiating its largest contract to date, a $6.2 million infrastructure consulting deal with Harmon County Municipal Authority. He placed printed copies before the judge and offered a copy to Brett. Brett took it like it might bite him. I already knew what was in it. I'd lived it. March 4th, 2019. Sandra to George. The Harmon County people want a performance bond. $800,000. The firm doesn't have it liquid right now. I need you to post it. I know it's a lot. I know I keep asking, but this is the one. George, if we land this, we're untouchable. March 4th, 2019. George to Sandra. March 5th, 2019. Sandra to George. I don't know what I'd do without you. Genuinely, you know that, right? You are the reason any of this exists. David read that last line aloud slowly. You are the reason any of this exists. He set the paper down. The courtroom was very quiet. I looked at Sandra. Sandra was looking at the table again, but we weren't done because David Chester, God bless that methodical, soft-spoken man, reached into the box one more time, and this time what he pulled out made Brett Evans' pen stop completely. Exhibit Supplemental 14. David said, this is the one I'd like to spend some time on, Your Honor. He walked to a small projector that his paralegal, a young woman named Chloe, who looked like she'd been awake since 4 a.m. and was running entirely on purpose, had quietly set up during the document presentations. The screen on. The courtroom wall lit up. It was a spreadsheet color-coded red, green, yellow. I felt something tighten in my chest. Sandra saw it and closed her eyes. This document, David said, was created by Sandra Peterson in January of 2010, 9 months before the firm was founded. It is her original business plan, the one she presented to her husband at their kitchen table. He clicked to the next slide. I draw your attention to the tab labeled Funding Sources. Judge Whitfield leaned forward. The Funding Sources tab had one line. Item 1, it said George, not personal investment, not spousal contribution, not seed capital, just George. Mrs. Peterson, Judge Whitfield said quietly. Did you prepare this document? Sandra's attorney leaned over. They whispered. Mrs. Peterson, the judge repeated. It's a yes or no question. Sandra looked up. For the first time in an hour, yes, she said. Her voice was steady. I'll give her that. And is this your handwriting? In the margin notation next to the funding source, David clicked to the next slide. The margin notation was enlarged. It said in Sandra's looping Cursive, can't handle it. He always does. The courtroom was so quiet. I could hear the ventilation system now. And listen, because here's where it gets complicated in the way that real life always gets complicated. I want to be honest with you about something. I didn't enjoy this. I know how this kind of story is supposed to feel. The wronged man vindicated, documents. Flying, the lying spouse finally exposed. Clean, satisfying. Credits roll. But Sandra Peterson had been my wife for 19 years. I knew how she took her coffee. I knew she cried at nature. Documentaries, but never at funerals. Because she said grief was private. I knew she kept a photograph of her late father in the bottom drawer of her desk. At work and never talked about him. Watching her sit at that table while the best years of our shared life got reduced to line items and exhibit. Numbers was not, I promise you, the happiest moment of mine, but she had stood in that room and told a judge I had never built anything. She had asked to leave me with $340,000 against a $14 million firm. She had tried to make me disappear, so I sat up straight and I let David work. Brett Evans called for a recess at 3:15 p.m. Judge Whitfield granted 15 minutes. I walked to the water fountain in the hallway. Rachel had texted 11 times. My brother Jim, who'd driven 4 hours to sit in the gallery, appeared next to me looking like a man who just watched a very good football game. Bud, he said. Don't. I said, I'm just saying, Jim, don't. He handed me a granola bar from his jacket pocket. Jim always had granola bars. I'd made fun of him for it for 30 years. I ate it without a word. David appeared, coffee in hand, expression unchanged. They want to talk, he said. I looked at him. Settlement. Brett just asked for my card. That's how they start. I leaned against the wall. 14 months. 14 months of being called reckless, irresponsible, invisible, of listening to my life story get rewritten by a man in a sharp suit. What do you think they'll offer? I asked. David tilted his head. Not enough. First offer never is. He sipped his coffee. But, George, we haven't shown them everything yet. I looked at him. The voicemail, I said. The voicemail, he confirmed. I thought about that voicemail. March 2019, Sandra had called me from her car. After the Harmon County contract came through, she didn't know I'd saved it. People never think you save things until you do. I'd listened to it maybe 100 times over the past 14 months. Not out of bitterness. Exactly. Out of something harder to name. The need, maybe, to hear that I hadn't imagined it. That it was real. That she had known that. She had always known. Play it, I said. In there. David nodded toward the courtroom. Play it. He studied me for a moment. Then let's go back in, he said. The recess ended at 3:31 p.m. Brett Evans did not look like a man who'd spent 15 minutes recovering. He looked like a man who'd spent 15 minutes being told things he wished he hadn't been told. Sandra sat down without looking at anyone. Judge Whitfield called the room to order. David Chester stood, reached into his jacket pocket, and produced a small digital recorder. And somewhere in the gallery, I heard my brother Jim unwrap another granola bar. The voicemail was 47 seconds long. It changed everything. This is where Sandra Peterson finally looks up, where Brett Evans says 4 words he's probably never said in a courtroom, where Judge Whitfield makes a ruling that I still think about on quiet mornings, and where I say the one thing I should have said years before any of this began. Stay with me. We're almost there. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. Asterisk 47 seconds. That's all it was. 47 seconds of Sandra's voice recorded on A Tuesday evening in March 2019, saved. To a cloud backup I'm not sure she knew existed. 47 seconds that contained more truth about our 19-year marriage than anything either of us had said in that courtroom all day. I'd listened to it 100 times in 14 months. And now, for the first time, Sandra was going to hear it too, in public under oath with a federal judge watching her face. Asterisk. David set the recorder on the edge of the plaintiff's table like it was nothing remarkable, like it was a pen, a coffee cup, a granola bar. Brett. Evans stared at it. Your Honor, David said. Exhibit Supplemental 17. Voicemail message left by Sandra Peterson on her husband's phone. March 6th, 2019. The evening of the day Sandra Peterson Design Group was formally awarded the Harmon County municipal contract, the $6.2 million deal that by her own firm's financial statements tripled annual revenue and established the company's current market position. He looked at Brett. We have the phone records confirming the time. Stamp. We have the cell tower data confirming Mrs. Peterson's location, her car parked outside the firm's office. We have the original audio file, the cloud, backup, and a certified transcript. He placed all 4 documents on the judge's bench in one neat stack. We're not guessing, counselor. Brett said nothing. David pressed play, and I want to tell you something about hearing your wife's voice in a room full of strangers. Even after everything, even after 14 months of legal warfare and depositions and a process server and a ham sandwich with yellow mustard, even then it does something to you, something you can't fully prepare for. Her voice on that recording was not the composed cream blazer voice from this morning. It was the kitchen table voice, the color-coded business plan voice, the voice that used to call me from the car just to talk back when we still did that. George, it's me. We got it. We actually got it. Harmon County just called. It's official. We got the contract. A pause. The sound of her breathing slightly unsteady. I'm sitting in the parking lot because I needed a minute before I went back inside. I needed to tell you first before anyone else. Another pause. I know things have been hard lately. I know I haven't said this enough, but none of this, George, none of this exists without you. The office, the people, any of it. You held this thing together when I couldn't. You believed in it when the numbers didn't make sense, and I was terrified. And you just kept showing up. Her voice broke just slightly, just at the edges. I don't know how to say thank you for that. I don't think thank you is even the right word. I love you. Okay. I love you, and I see you. I see everything you do. I see all of it. The recording ended 47 seconds. The courtroom was completely still. The kind of still that isn't peaceful. The kind that sits on your chest. I was looking straight ahead at the middle distance at nothing at the wood paneling on the far wall. Doing what David had told me. Doing nothing. But I could feel Sandra looking at me for the first time all day. Actually looking. I didn't turn. Judge Whitfield took a long breath and set down his pen. He looked at Brett Evans. Brett Evans. $400 an hour. Brett Evans. The man who'd spent the morning describing me as professionally invisible and financially reckless. Brett Evans looked at his client and then he looked at the judge and he said, for words I suspect he had not said in a courtroom in a very long time. We need a moment. Judge Whitfield gave them 10 minutes. I sat at my table. David sat beside me. Neither of us spoke. Chloe, his paralegal, was typing something quietly on her laptop. Jim was in the gallery behind me, and I could feel him physically restraining himself from saying something. At the 8-minute mark, Brett Evans walked over to our table. He didn't sit. He stood with his hands in his pockets and the specific posture of a man who was accustomed to winning and was currently doing difficult math. David, he said quietly, what does your client want? David Looked at me. I looked at Brett. Equitable recognition, I said. Brett blinked. Define equitable 40% stake in. The firm valued at current market paid. Out over 5 years at prime rate. My name on the founding documents amended. Retroactively to reflect my financial role. I paused and a formal correction. To the Architectural Digest record. Brett stared at me. The magazine, I said. Helpfully, the one that called herself Maid. George, David said. I know, I said. I'm just making a point. Brett looked at his shoes for a moment. The 40% is less than what a court will award. Me, if we go back in there, I said, not unkindly, just factually the way you read a balance sheet. Brett straightened his jacket. I'll talk to my client. He walked back. I watched Sandra listen to him. Her back was straight. Her hands were flat on the table. She was nodding, slowly in the way people nod when they're hearing something they already know is true. She didn't look over at me, but she nodded. We went back and at 4:07 p.m. Judge Whitfield looked at both tables. Has there been any movement toward resolution? Brett stood. Your Honor, the parties have reached a preliminary agreement in principle and respectfully request a 30-day period to finalize terms. Judge Whitfield looked at David. David stood. The defense concurs, Your Honor, pending formal documentation of all agreed terms before this court. The judge nodded slowly. He picked up his pen and made a note. Then he set the pen down again and did something I hadn't expected. He looked directly at me. Mr. Peterson, he said. I stood. Your Honor, he studied me for a moment with the measured expression of a man who had presided over enough divorces to know that the paperwork was never the whole story. In 31 years on the bench, he said, I've seen a lot of people sit where you're sitting. People who were wronged. People who had every right to be angry. He paused. Most of them couldn't wait to show me what they had. Couldn't wait for the moment the other side finally understood. He tapped his pen on the bench once. You sat here all day and said nothing. Let the documents speak. He tilted his head slightly. That's either very disciplined or very wise. I haven't decided which. With respect, Your Honor, I said, I don't think there's much difference between the two. Judge Whitfield almost smiled. Almost. 30 days, he said. We're adjourned. The courtroom emptied slowly. The way courtrooms do. The shuffling of papers, the muted conversations, the particular exhaustion of a room where something real just happened. Jim materialized at my elbow with a granola bar and the expression of a man who had been waiting all day to say something and was now physically incapable of holding it. George, go ahead, I said. That was the greatest thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life. It was theater, George. It was theater, George. It was my marriage ending, I said. He stopped, put his hand on my shoulder. Yeah, he said quietly. I know. I'm sorry. And that was Jim. That was always Jim. Loud right up until the moment it mattered. And then exactly. Right. I was putting on my coat in the hallway when I heard her. George. I turned around. Sandra was standing 10 feet away. Brett was somewhere behind her, giving us space in a professional way. That attorneys give space when they've been told to. She'd taken off the cream blazer. She was holding it over one arm, and she looked for the first time in what felt like years like herself. Not the Architectural Digest version, not the courtroom version, just Sandra. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd spent the day hearing themselves described by their own words and hadn't enjoyed it. I'm not going to ask you to understand, she said, what I did, how I framed it. I'm not going to, she stopped, pressed her lips together. I convinced myself it was fair that I'd done the work and the money was just the money, I said. Yes. And I was just the money. She flinched. Just slightly. That's not it wasn't. Always. I know, I said. And I meant it. It wasn't always. We stood in that hallway for a moment that had 19 years. In it, the voicemail, she said finally. I meant it when I said it. I know you. Did then why? Because meaning something and acting accordingly are different. Skills, Sandra, I said. You were always better at the first one. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once, the way you nod when someone has handed you something true and you have no choice but to hold it. The Architectural Digest thing. She said the amendment to the founding documents. Hey, pause. I'll do it. Not because Brett told me to, because it's right. I thought about the kitchen table, the color-coded plan, the check for $47,000. The way she'd cried. I thought about the granola bar and the ham sandwich and the blue shirt with the mustard stain. That never came out. I thought about 47 seconds. Thank you, I said. She nodded. Again, turned, walked back toward Brett. And then halfway down the hall, she stopped, didn't turn around. For what? It's worth, she said to the middle. Distance. You built everything. George. She kept walking. I put my hands in my pockets. Jim appeared next. To me. You okay? He asked. I thought about it honestly. Ask me in a year. I said. He nodded, handed me a granola bar. I took it. We walked out into the October afternoon, into the cold, clean air outside the courthouse, into whatever came next, and I stood on the top step for just a moment, looking out at the parking lot and the ordinary Tuesday traffic beyond it, and I thought about something Judge Whitfield had said, disciplined or wise. I still don't know which one I was, but I built something. I know that much. I built all of it. And in the end, in that hallway, in 47 seconds, in a cream blazer held over one arm, Sandra Peterson finally said, so that was enough. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.